The twin sons of Elcaris hung heavy in the sky, casting long, rippling shadows over the sprawling trade hub of Narek Spire. It was a city built on chaos, perched precariously on the edge of civilization and madness, where traders and wanderers from every corner of the galaxy bartered, schemed, and occasionally fought to the death. To Dax Connors, it was just another pit stop in his string of increasingly questionable decisions. "All I need is a fuel cell, and maybe one of those self-cleaning protein bars," he muttered to himself as he navigated the bustling crowd, dodging an 8-legged vendor pushing a cart of glowing fungi. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fried something or other, and the buzz of alien dialects swirled around him like a chaotic symphony. Dax's ship, the Rust Bucket Royale, named less for irony and more for brutal honesty, was docked in one of the outer bays. It wasn't pretty, but it had gotten him this far. The plan was simple: restock, refuel, and get out before anyone figured out he'd left half his docking fee unpaid. But plans, as Dax often lamented, had a way of unraveling. As he rounded a corner toward the main market square, a commotion caught his attention. A crowd had gathered near the central fountain, their voices raised in anger. Elcarans, tall, lithe beings with shimmering bioluminescent skin, stood in a tight circle, their body language bristling with disdain. At the center of it all was a lone figure, smaller, slumped, and trembling. Dax's curiosity got the better of him. He edged closer, craning his neck for a better look. The figure was young, perhaps an adolescent by Elcaran standards. Her iridescent skin shimmered faintly, but the usual vibrant patterns of her kind were dim, muted. Her 6 tendrils, which hung like a cascade of glowing hair, were tangled and dull. "Exile," one of the Elcarans hissed, his voice sharp as a plasma cutter. "You have shamed us. You are no longer of the tribe." The girl flinched, but said nothing, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Dax wasn't sure what possessed him to step forward. Maybe it was the way the crowd loomed over her, or the hopeless defiance in her hunched shoulders. Or maybe, as he often joked to himself, he was just genetically programmed to make terrible choices. All right, he said, pushing through the crowd. "What's with the public shaming? Didn't anyone tell you it's bad for the tourist reviews?" The Elcarans turned to him, their glowing eyes narrowing in unison. Dax offered a lopsided grin, the kind he reserved for situations that had a 50-50 chance of getting him punched. "This does not concern you, human," one of them said, his voice cold. "See, that's where you're wrong," Dax replied, spreading his hands. "Because I'm concerned and I'm human. Ergo, it concerns me." He paused, then added with mock seriousness, "Also, I think your translation implant might need a reboot." That last line sounded a little generic bad guy. A few bystanders stifled laughs, though the Elcarans were less amused. "This girl," the leader spat, pointing a slender, glowing finger, "is a traitor. She has defied the ways of our people. Her presence here dishonors us all." Dax looked at the girl. Her eyes were wide and luminous, and though she hadn't spoken, her gaze was locked onto him, a mix of suspicion and desperation. "Right," Dax said, nodding slowly. "And by defied, you mean?" "She questioned the sacred codes," another Elcaran snapped. Questioning authority," Dax interrupted, nodding sagely. "Terrible crime. Really disruptive. Next thing you know, she's going to start a book club." The leader glared at him. "She is no longer welcome among us. Leave her be, human, or suffer the consequences." Dax held up his hands. "All right. Message received. Just one more question." The Elcaran sighed. "What? Where's the nearest good noodle place? All this righteous indignation is making me hungry." The crowd dispersed, muttering angrily as they left the girl behind. Dax waited until the last of them had disappeared into the throng of the market before turning to her. "Hey," he said gently, "you okay?" The girl stared at him for a long moment, then muttered something in Elcaran. Her voice was soft, musical, but the words were sharp. "Let me guess," Dax said. "That was either thank you or get lost." "Both," she said in heavily accented standard. Dax laughed. Fair enough. Name's Dax, by the way. And you are? She hesitated, her tendrils twitching. Archie, she said finally. Archie, he repeated, testing the name. Well, Archie, looks like you've got yourself a one-way ticket out of town. Lucky for you, I happen to specialize in bad decisions. Need a lift? She frowned. Why would you help me? Dax grinned. Because I've got a soft spot for lost causes. Also, I'm bored. Archie studied him, her luminous eyes narrowing. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said, but if you betray me— Yeah, Dax interrupted, waving a hand. You'll do something terrifying with those tentacles. Got it. She glared at him, but he could have sworn he saw the faintest flicker of a smile. As they made their way through the market, Dax couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just signed up for a lot more than he bargained for. But then, he mused, that was half the fun. The hoverbike sputtered and groaned beneath Dax and Archie as they sped across the desolate terrain beyond Narek Spire. A tangle of red-hued canyons stretched into the distance, their jagged edges illuminated by the eerie glow of Elkaris's twin suns. The air was thick with electrostatic charges, making Dax's hair stand on end beneath his battered helmet. I swear, this thing has more personality than reliability, Dax muttered, smacking the dashboard. The bike responded with a pathetic whine before coughing out a burst of speed. See? Works every time. Just needs a little encouragement. Archie sat behind him, her posture stiff and awkward. She clutched the sides of her seat with white-knuckled intensity, as though the universe itself might suddenly toss her into oblivion. Her tendrils swayed in the wind, twitching slightly every time the bike hit a bump. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She finally said, her voice tinged with irritation. Dax grinned over his shoulder. I mean, a little. Nothing like some life-threatening terrain to bond over, right? Relax. I'm an expert at, mostly surviving these kinds of trips. That is not reassuring. Would it help if I told you this bike has a 70% success rate in not exploding? No. Good, because I made that up. But hey, we're still in one piece, so that's a win. Archie let out an audible sigh and turned her gaze to the horizon, the faint shimmer of her bioluminescent skin dimming slightly. Dax noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he focused on navigating the increasingly treacherous path ahead. The canyons were a maze, filled with towering rock spires and narrow passages that seemed to shift in the shimmering heat. Dax kept one hand on the throttle and the other hovering near his wrist-mounted scanner, a cobbled-together device that beeped sporadically. You could at least tell me where we're going, Archie said after a long silence. Depends, Dax replied. Are you more of a run as far as possible type, or do you prefer the whole hide-in-plain-sight strategy? Because I've got like half a plan for both. Archie frowned. Half a plan? Optimistic, I know. Her tendrils twitched again, a nervous habit Dax was starting to recognize. You really don't know what you're doing, do you? Look, Archie, he said, pulling the bike to a halt on a flat outcrop. If I waited to know what I was doing, I'd still be back on Earth flipping burgers. You want calculated decisions? You're looking at the wrong guy. But if you want someone to wing it and somehow not die in the process, then congrats, you hit the jackpot. Archie dismounted, giving the bike a suspicious look as if it might disintegrate under its own weight. She folded her arms, her luminous eyes narrowing. Why are you even helping me? You don't know me. Dax shrugged. Maybe I'm just a sucker for a good underdog story. Or maybe I saw a bunch of uptight glowing jerks picking on a kid and thought, yeah, I should probably do something about that. I'm not a kid, she snapped, her voice sharp. Could have fooled me, Dax said, smirking. You're what, 16? 17? 82. Dax blinked. Well, that's unexpected. You look great for 82. What's your secret? Alien kale smoothies? Archie rolled her eyes, though the faintest hint of amusement flickered across her face. We age differently. It doesn't matter. Fair enough. Dax said, sitting down on a nearby rock and pulling a ration bar from his jacket. He held it up. Want half? Tastes like sadness and cardboard, but it's technically edible. Arky shook her head. I'm not hungry. Suit yourself. He unwrapped the bar, taking a bite with a dramatic grimace. Just like Mom used to make, if Mom was a soulless food processing robot. The corner of Arky's mouth twitched, but she quickly masked it with a scowl. All right, let's get serious for a sec, Dax said, brushing crumbs from his jacket. Your tribe isn't going to just let you waltz off into the sunset. I saw those bounty hunters lurking in the market. They weren't there for the noodles. Arky stiffened. They'll come after me. Exactly. Which means we need to stay 2 steps ahead. And your plan? Working on it, Dax said, tapping his temple. But first, we need a place to lay low. There's an abandoned mining colony a few clicks east. It's got just enough leftover tech to scramble any trackers, plus a couple of cozy death traps to keep things interesting. Death traps? Dax grinned. Kidding. Mostly. The journey to the colony was uneventful, save for a brief encounter with a pack of scavenger drones. Dax dispatched them with a jury-rigged EMP device that sparked violently in his hand. Perfectly safe, he assured Arky, shaking the smoke from his sleeve. The colony itself was a sprawling network of crumbling structures built into the canyon walls, rusted catwalks, connected cavernous chambers, and dim emergency lights flickered sporadically, powered by what little energy remained in the ancient generators. Arky looked around, her expression unreadable. This is primitive. Hey, don't knock it, Dax said, tossing his pack onto a dusty console. Primitive means low-tech, and low-tech means harder to track. Plus, it's got character, like my ship, and my bike, and, me. Your standards are very low. Yep, Dax said cheerfully. Keeps life interesting. As they settled in, Arky began tinkering with a broken terminal, her fingers moving deftly across the alien interface. Dax watched, impressed. You're pretty handy with tech, he said. She didn't look up. It's common knowledge among my people. Yeah, well, among my people, common knowledge is arguing over whether pineapple belongs on pizza, so you've got a head start. This time, Arky didn't hide her smile. For the first time since they'd met, the tension between them eased, just a little. But in the shadows of the canyon, unseen eyes watched, and the faint hum of a distant tracker drone signaled that their reprieve would be short-lived. The mining colony's darkened halls were quiet, save for the distant hum of malfunctioning energy converters and the occasional drip of water echoing off the metal floors. The further Dax and Arky ventured, the more it felt like they were walking through the bones of a forgotten civilization. Old machinery, its purpose long lost to time, sprawled across the cavernous rooms like abandoned giants. This place gives me the creeps, Dax muttered, glancing around. He hadn't expected much from an abandoned colony, but the atmosphere was more unsettling than he'd anticipated. The flickering lights and hollow sounds made it feel like they were being watched, though he knew that was probably just the paranoia setting in. It's like the set of a bad horror holo. The ghosts of Elkaris, the forgotten miners. He shuddered for effect. I swear if a creepy alien pops out of the shadows and starts monologuing about lost souls, I'm out of here. Arky's eyes flicked over the ancient machinery, her tendrils brushing against the rusted surface of a console. I wouldn't worry. If any ghosts are lurking, they're probably just trying to escape from this place. Fair point, Dax said, casting one last glance at the cavernous hallway. He'd had his share of spooky old ruins, and the last thing he needed was for this one to be home to sentient, haunted machinery. Well, at least the vibe here is low-key. No bounty hunters, no glowing Elkarans. And no food. Arky raised an eyebrow at the empty containers and discarded ration packs strewn about. And no working technology, apparently. Yeah, about that, Dax said, pulling out his handheld device. It was a mess of wires, mismatched buttons, and a couple of makeshift patches that he had crafted during a particularly desperate moment on a backwater moon. "I'm trying to hack into the mainframe here. Just need a couple more minutes to get this old girl to cough up some data." He tapped the device with exaggerated care. Nothing says "well prepared" like a scrap-built gadget held together by hope and duct tape. Arky stood with her arms folded, watching him work. "You humans really do make things out of nothing." "I prefer the term resourceful," Dax replied with a grin. "Besides, when the galaxy hands you garbage, you turn it into something that might get you out of trouble, or at least make you look cool while you're doing it." "I see." Arky's voice was unreadable, her gaze drifting to the far corner of the room. There, a tattered banner hung loosely from the ceiling, fluttering in the draft. Her expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "Do you ever wonder why my people always build so much only to abandon it?" Dax paused, fingers still on the device, and looked over at her. "I thought we were talking about your people, not mine. My people are usually too busy arguing over pizza toppings to build anything lasting." Arky gave him a sidelong glance, the corners of her mouth twitching as though she might be fighting a smile. "I meant the Elkarans." "Ah," Dax said, setting the device down and stepping closer. "You know, I'm starting to get the feeling you've got a lot more on your mind than just being exiled." Arky's tendrils flicked uneasily. She stepped away from the console, her movements tight. "I didn't ask for your help, human, and I didn't ask for your curiosity." "Fair enough," Dax said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'll let you brood. But you know, you're not the only one with baggage. I'm just a freelance trouble magnet with a bad attitude, and this whole intergalactic exile thing is giving me flashbacks to my last vacation on Zorvok 9. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well." Arky's eyes narrowed. "What happened there?" "Let's just say that when you bet your entire savings on a prize-winning hover race and lose to a sentient cactus, you don't come out looking like a winner. I still owe some very angry plant people a considerable amount of money." Arky's expression softened, a slight chuckle escaping her. "You're insufferable." "I'm glad you noticed," Dax said, flashing her a grin. "So, back to the real issue. I'm guessing you didn't just defy your tribe's laws because you got bored one afternoon and decided to tick off some people with glowing skin. There's more to it, right?" For a moment, Arky said nothing, her gaze drifting to the shadowy corners of the room, as if the walls themselves held the answers. Then, with a quiet sigh, she spoke. "It's not just defying their laws. I questioned their traditions, their beliefs, and when I did, I became a threat to everything they stood for." Dax leaned back against the dusty console, contemplating her words. "I don't get it. You were an outsider before you even got to Narek Spire, right? Your people don't seem like the let's make friends with the locals type." Arky's gaze was distant, haunted by memories that Dax couldn't even begin to understand. "We're different. We're the ones who ask too many questions. We're the ones who look at the sacred codes and see flaws, see cracks in the system. They can't stand that." Dax didn't answer immediately. He'd known people who'd bucked the system before, even lost everything for it, but none of them had glowing tendrils or the weight of an entire culture on their shoulders. "So," he said after a long silence, trying to lighten the mood, "are you telling me you've been exiled for being too clever? That's like getting kicked out of a game for being too good at it." "That's exactly what it feels like," she muttered. "Well, that's messed up," Dax said. "But hey, I'm starting to think maybe your tribe's just scared of you." Arky's eyes flashed with something unreadable, but there was a flicker of something else. Appreciation, maybe. "You don't understand. I don't. But that doesn't mean I can't try." Dax's voice softened. "I'm not here to fix your problems, Arky. But if you're going to keep running, you might want someone on your side who isn't afraid to make a few enemies along the way." She looked at him for a long moment, the silence between them thickening. Finally, her tendrils shifted slightly, and she gave a small nod. You may not understand, but you're right about one thing. I don't want to keep running." Before Dax could respond, the low hum of the colony's emergency alarm systems echoed through the halls, breaking the moment. "Well, that can't be good," Dax said, straightening up. "Let me guess. Someone just figured out we're here." Arky's eyes hardened. "It's my tribe. They found us." "Well, crap." Dax looked around, scanning the darkened corridor. "This is why I don't do surprise parties. Let's move." They both turned and hurried down the hallway, knowing the chase was about to begin. The invisible thread that bound them together, for better or worse, was about to be tested in ways they hadn't yet imagined. Dax's boots clanged against the metal floors as he sprinted ahead, the adrenaline from the alarm pushing him faster than he would have thought possible for a man who'd spent most of his life dodging paperwork and inconvenient obligations. His heart raced, his breath coming in short bursts as he tried to ignore the rising sense of dread that gnawed at his gut. Arky, surprisingly quick for someone who seemed perpetually wound tight, kept pace beside him, her tendrils whipping behind her like the wake of a comet. "Tell me again why this wasn't a bad idea," Dax called over his shoulder as they ducked through a narrow passage that smelled faintly of stale ozone. "Because, despite your best efforts to mess up our escape, you're still my best option," Arky snapped, barely glancing at him. "Flattery, my favorite form of gratitude," Dax quipped, grinning despite the tension. "If I make it out of here alive, I'm going to write a self-help book for running for your life, complete with tips on how to look cool while doing it." "Please don't." The emergency alarms were louder now, their shrill tones reverberating off the walls of the colony, adding to the sense of urgency. Dax didn't need to be a tactical genius to know that the sound of them was probably as appealing to their pursuers as a freshly opened invitation to a good old-fashioned chase. All right. Time to put the escape artist skills to the test," Dax muttered, slowing slightly to adjust the map on his wristband. It flickered erratically, struggling to lock onto a proper signal in the sprawling maze of decrepit hallways. "I'm starting to think the map on this thing was designed by a blindfolded toddler who got paid in space snacks." Arky barely hid her eye roll. "Do you ever stop talking?" Dax gave a half grin. "Nope, it's my greatest strength, and my most annoying trait. Pick one." Ahead, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber filled with towering metal crates. Some had toppled over and others had been split open by time and neglect, their contents long since scavenged or decayed. The dim lights in the chamber flickered, casting long, dancing shadows along the walls. "This is great," Dax said, pausing to survey the room. "I've always wanted to get stuck in a haunted warehouse, surrounded by, what's that, sentient scrap metal and a rogue gang of pissed-off exiles?" "Classic. Not helpful," Arky muttered, taking the lead and darting towards a pile of crates stacked high near the far wall. Dax hurried after her, weaving through the debris. "You know, I've always wondered why so many places look like they were built for a war that never happened. Who looked at this and said, 'Yep, this is definitely the place to stash all the things that shouldn't be stashed'? Why not a nice little beachfront property? Would have been so much easier to escape from, don't you think?" Arky didn't answer. Her attention was fixed on something ahead, an old access door hidden behind an overturned crate. It had a faint, unlit symbol on it, but her instincts told her it would lead them to a place they could hide, maybe even escape the chase. She hurried to it, pressing her hand to a panel next to the door. What are you doing?" Dax asked, trying to keep his voice light. "I'm hacking it. What does it look like?" Arky responded without looking up. "Wait, hold on," Dax said, eyeing her suspiciously. What? You know how to hack an old mining colony's security system?" "Of course," Arky said, her voice a little too matter-of-fact. "Did you think I couldn't? We don't just wander into a new system without learning how to navigate it." Dax raised an eyebrow. "No, The door hissed open, cutting off his sentence. "Well, I guess you're full of surprises," Dax said, glancing at the now ajar door. "Okay, I'm impressed. I'll even give you a 5-star review when this whole exile thing is over." Archie ignored him, slipping through the doorway and into a narrow, dimly lit passage. Dax followed, just as the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway behind them. "Uh-oh," Dax muttered, his hand reaching instinctively for the plasma pistol strapped to his side. "Looks like we've got company. This is getting way too real for my taste." "We have to move," Archie said, her voice low and urgent. She took off again, moving faster now, her form blurring with each step. "Right behind you," Dax called, adjusting his grip on the pistol as they rounded another corner. They were deep within the bowels of the colony now, the air growing thicker and more oppressive. It smelled of dust, rust, and something else, a faint electrical burn that lingered in the atmosphere. "Do you hear that?" Dax asked, suddenly halting. Archie paused too, her head tilting slightly, her alien senses alert. There was a soft, almost imperceptible hum in the air now, like the echo of something too large to be fully realized. "That's not just the colony's generators," Archie said, her voice dropping into a tone Dax hadn't heard from her before, serious, intense. "That's the sound of something tracking us." Dax's stomach sank. "Oh, fantastic. Just when I thought this day couldn't get any worse. What's next? A giant mutant space worm?" Archie's eyes flashed. "Don't tempt fate." Before Dax could respond, a mechanical whirring sound rang out, followed by a burst of light from an adjacent hallway. The door at the far end of the corridor exploded outward, revealing a dozen armed Elkarans, their sleek, glowing forms outlined against the dim lighting. They weren't alone. At the front of the group was a towering humanoid figure, its armored frame casting a long shadow as it strode toward them. "Well, that's new," Dax said, raising his pistol. "I was expecting some angry people, but not a walking tank." Archie's eyes flickered to the figure, her face hardening. "That's Zareth. He's a tracker, a very skilled one. The Elkarans send him after people who threaten their control." Dax grimaced. "Great. A big guy with a lot of firepower who probably doesn't understand sarcasm. We're really in it now." Zareth's voice boomed across the chamber, amplified by a strange robotic modulator. "You cannot escape, Exiled One. Surrender now, and you will be spared." "Yeah, not really my thing, Zareth," Dax replied with a smirk, holding his ground. "If I had a nickel for every time someone tried to kill me while giving me a choice, I didn't want... well, I'd still be poor, but at least I'd be used to it." "Move," Archie snapped, grabbing Dax's arm and pulling him back. "Now." Dax didn't need to be told twice. He followed her, his heart pounding as they darted down another hallway, weaving in and out of old equipment. The sound of Zareth's footsteps reverberated behind them, a steady drumbeat of pursuit. It wasn't going to be easy. But Dax had faced worse odds, barely, and he wasn't about to let a giant metal man and his glowing entourage get the better of him. One thing was for sure, this was far from over. Dax's boots squeaked as he sprinted alongside Archie, both of them weaving in and out of the tangle of broken machinery that cluttered the hallways of the mining colony. The sound of their pursuers' footsteps echoed louder, closing in like a thunderstorm gathering speed. Dax could feel the weight of the situation settling on his chest, but he fought it down with humor, something he'd always relied on when things got ugly. "So," he said between breaths, "I've been thinking. If we survive this, I'm totally going to write a holoplay based on this. We'll call it The Great Escape, Part 2, No One Saw That Coming." Archie's tendrils flicked, her gaze sharp as ever. "You're impossible. But if it's a hit, I want royalties." Dax flashed a grin, despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "I'll split them with you. Well, most of them. I'm not that generous." Archie's eyes narrowed, but there was the faintest hint of a smirk tugging at her lips. "I'll take my payment in not dying today." "That's the spirit," Dax said with a little too much enthusiasm for the situation. "Now, speaking of not dying, any chance we can lose our new friends without getting vaporized?" Archie didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed a hand to the wall, her fingers brushing over a hidden panel, before pulling away in frustration. The colony's systems are too outdated to help us now. We can't just shut down the airlocks and trap them in a room. We need another way. A new way? Dax asked, eyebrow raised. You know, I had hoped the cunning alien escape plan would be a little more, concrete by now. You've been awfully quiet on the details front. She glanced at him, almost irritated, but the edge in her voice softened. There is a way, but it's going to take both of us. You mean a two-person thing? Dax raised an eyebrow, not sure whether he was relieved or worried. Are we talking mind melding, telekinetic maneuvering, or just a good old-fashioned run and dodge? I'm serious, Dax, Arky said, her voice firm. We need to split up. Split up? Dax's heart sank. No, I've seen enough holo films to know how this goes. Someone always gets mysteriously trapped in a vent shaft, and then it's a whole let's rescue the hero thing. I'll be fine, Arky assured him, her tone leaving no room for argument. You need to distract them long enough for me to access a secondary system. We can't outrun them forever. The only way out is to... Before she could finish, a loud crash echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable roar of Zareth's voice. I will find you, exile! Dax grimaced. And now he's yelling. Good. That means we're really in trouble. He grabbed Arky's shoulder and pulled her towards a small maintenance door, sliding it open just as a flash of light sparked down the hallway. Listen, I'm no expert on running for my life, but I've got a couple of tricks up my sleeve. And splitting up? That's a terrible idea. You want a distraction? I'll give you a distraction. Arky's eyes flicked to the door ahead of them. We don't have a choice. With a sudden twist of her tendrils, she pushed him through the door. Go. Fine, but don't go getting yourself killed while I'm playing the hero, Dax grumbled. That's my job. Arky's mouth twitched, and for the first time, Dax thought he saw a flash of real emotion, a small smile, one that barely touched her eyes. But it was there, and for just a moment, he felt a fleeting connection, an understanding. Without another word, she pressed a button on the wall, causing a hidden hatch to slide open at the far end of the room, leading down a darkened corridor that seemed to pulse with energy. Dax hesitated for a second. This is a terrible idea. I know, Arky said, her voice faint now, already disappearing down the hallway. But it's the only one we've got. Great, Dax muttered to himself, running his fingers through his hair. Just me, myself, and the giant, angry Elkaran death squad. He didn't have time to think about it any longer. The sound of heavy footsteps pounding closer made him move faster, even though his brain kept reminding him that this was definitely not how he imagined spending his afternoon. With one last glance at Arky's retreating figure, Dax turned and bolted for a nearby maintenance shaft, a narrow tunnel that wound its way beneath the colony's lower levels. It wasn't much of a plan. Hell, it wasn't even a decent plan, but it was better than nothing. As he crawled into the shaft, he could feel the metal walls pressing in around him. His breath echoed back at him, and for a moment, he imagined himself as some kind of heroic adventurer, crawling through the guts of a crumbling space station to save the day. Then he heard the unmistakable sound of plasma fire sizzling overhead, followed by a shout from Zareth's squad. Not today, Dax muttered under his breath, pushing himself through the narrow space, every instinct telling him to keep moving. He reached a junction in the shaft and hesitated. He couldn't hear Arky anymore, and he wondered if she was okay. The tension between them had softened in the last few hours, but that didn't mean he trusted her completely. He'd seen too many people who seemed like they had it all together, only to watch them fall apart when things got real. Still, there was something about her, the way she moved, the way she handled herself, that made him think she could handle herself in a way most people couldn't. But she'd made him a promise. She'd made him a promise that she would be fine, and he was going to hold her to it. Dax paused, trying to recalibrate his thoughts. Time was running out, and if he didn't keep moving, they'd both be trapped. Fingers drumming nervously on his leg, he hit the small device attached to his wrist, his scrappy, second-hand comm device. Hey Arky, just checking in. If you're alive, send me a signal. I'd hate to think you're already on your way to being vaporized. There was a brief silence on the other end, before her voice crackled back to him. I'm here, she said, her tone oddly calm, considering the situation. I've found the secondary controls. I just need another minute. Dax blew out a breath. Good, I'm on my way. Don't be reckless, Dax. I can handle this. Yeah, sure, just as long as I don't have to handle a giant Zareth. Stay hidden, she snapped. That's your job. Noted. I'm going to go be incredibly subtle now, Dax said with a wink, even though she couldn't see it. Just hurry up, okay? The comm line went quiet again, and Dax could almost feel the seconds ticking by. He hated the feeling of being helpless, but right now, he was stuck playing a waiting game. He could only hope Arky would be faster than Zareth. The corridor was cold, far colder than Dax had anticipated for a colony that had long since passed its prime. He crouched low in the maintenance shaft, holding his breath, listening for any sounds of pursuit. It was too quiet. In a way, the silence was worse than the plasma blasts and clanking footsteps. That he could deal with. Silence, though. Silence was the prelude to something far more dangerous. So, he said to no one in particular, trying to keep his nerves in check. Is it too late to back out of this whole rescue mission thing? His voice echoed faintly against the metal walls of the shaft. Of course, no one answered. The only response came in the form of a low, mechanical hum, the colony's failing power grid sputtering somewhere far above him, reminding him that they were running out of time. He glanced down at his wristband. It was flickering like a dying star, the map on it barely registering as more than a vague outline of the colony's layout. Whatever Arky was doing, she had to be close to finishing her task. They'd come this far. They couldn't afford to mess it up now. I'd better not be talking to myself in a vacuum, Dax muttered, shaking his head. Because that's how it starts, you know. First you're talking to yourself, and then you're naming the vents. It's a slippery slope. Just as he started to settle into a rhythm, trying to convince himself he wasn't about to be captured, a faint beeping interrupted his thoughts. His wristband buzzed and he glanced down, immediately grinning. About time, he said under his breath, tapping the device to activate the communication line. Arky? Dax? Came the strained voice over the comm. I've got the system, almost. Almost? Almost? Dax half snarled, half laughed. You're telling me I've been crawling around in these pipes, barely avoiding death, and you're almost done? What does that even mean? I'm getting there, she replied, a touch of exasperation in her tone. The override command is almost ready, but the access points are a mess. It's old tech, Dax. We're running out of time. Dax clenched his fists, feeling his stomach churn. Zareth's going to be here any second, Arky. I can feel it. I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of getting vaporized before I finish my coffee. Well, I'm sure your coffee would taste great while you're running for your life, Arky said, her voice now sounding oddly calm despite the situation. But you need to buy me time. I'm almost done. Just a few more seconds. Dax exhaled a shaky breath. The sound of Zareth's footsteps had gotten louder. He could practically hear the metallic clang of the exiled hunter's armor as it approached. The tension in his body was coiled tight, like a spring ready to snap. Fine, time to earn my hero points, Dax said, trying to muster a bit of humor. He clapped his hands together as though preparing for a performance. Let's see if I can be subtle for once. He peered cautiously around the corner of the shaft, assessing the space ahead. The hall stretched out before him, dimly lit by flickering lights. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet. But Dax knew that wasn't going to last. He pulled out his plasma pistol, the weight of it oddly reassuring. The small, outdated weapon wasn't much, but it was something, and it might be enough to slow down Zareth and his crew long enough for Arky to finish the job. Just as he was about to make a break for it, something moved in the shadows. He froze, holding his breath. The movement came again, faint, but unmistakable. Dax cursed under his breath. Well, this is awkward, he muttered, watching as the faint outline of a figure emerged from the gloom. It wasn't Zareth, but it was an Elkaran soldier, their glowing eyes scanning the corridor. The soldier moved with precise, mechanical movements, clearly on high alert. Dax's heart pounded in his chest as he weighed his options. He could try to sneak past, but the slightest sound would alert them to his presence. Or he could do what he did best, make noise and hope for the best. "Decision time," he said, stepping out from his hiding spot. He took a deep breath, then raised his voice. "Hey, Shiny!" The Elkaran froze, its head snapping toward him. Dax flashed a grin, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think you dropped something," he said, nodding to the side. "It's a big old bag of don't catch me that I'm sure you'll want to grab before—" The soldier didn't wait for him to finish. A sharp hiss cut through the air, and the soldier's hand went to its plasma rifle, aiming directly at Dax. "Oh, this is going well," Dax muttered, diving for cover behind a nearby crate. The blast rang out, scorching the metal wall where he'd just been standing. "Okay, plan B. Run for your life. Don't look back." He dashed down the hallway, the sound of the Elkaran's pursuit echoing behind him. Plasma blasts whizzed past him, narrowly missing, but Dax wasn't going to wait for a third shot. Behind him, the faint sound of Arky's voice crackled through the comm again. "DAX!" she barked. "What are you doing? I'm buying you time, just keep doing your thing," Dax shouted over his shoulder, twisting to avoid another blast. His boots slid on the smooth metal floor as he veered around a corner. "Let's see how long I can keep this up before I accidentally turn into space dust." His pulse was racing, but he didn't slow down. There was something almost freeing about it, knowing that for once he was actually doing something. Running, sure, but it was action of a sort. And in Dax's world, action was the only thing that kept the chaos at bay. The sound of Zareth's voice suddenly boomed from somewhere in the distance, amplified by his voice modulator. "You cannot escape exile. You will pay for your betrayal." Dax swore under his breath, feeling the sweat on his brow, the weight of it threatening to drag him down. He was reaching the end of the hall, a junction leading to a maintenance elevator. But just as he was about to dart toward it, he caught sight of Zareth's hulking form coming into view. The large humanoid was moving toward him with deliberate steps, a shadow of menace that could crush anything in its path. "Well, if it isn't the biggest, angriest shadow of death in the galaxy," Dax said, voice shaking with a hint of dark humor. "All right, big guy. I've got one more trick left." He didn't wait for the plasma shots to catch up. With a desperate grin, he dove into the maintenance elevator and slammed the button, sealing himself inside. The heavy hum of the elevator starting up was drowned out by the sound of plasma fire ricocheting off the walls above him. He wasn't sure where the elevator was going. Frankly, he didn't care. All he needed was a few seconds of peace, and maybe a way to actually survive this mess. "I hope you're almost done, Arky," he muttered, pressing his back against the wall. "Because I've got a feeling things are about to get, interesting." The elevator descended in a quiet, unsettling hum, the sound of metal groaning beneath the weight of the broken colony's dilapidated infrastructure. Dax leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, his body screaming in protest from the sprint, the dodging, the running for his life. Sweat dripped from his brow, but there was no time for exhaustion. His thoughts were scattered, racing faster than his legs ever could. He had one last move to make, and it had to work. He glanced at the comm unit on his wrist, its flickering screen still showing the partial readout of Arky's progress. She'd been this close to finishing the override when he'd had to run for cover. The mission, the colony, the fight against Zareth and his band of zealots, it all came down to this moment. "Come on, Arky," he muttered to himself, glancing at the display once more. "Hurry up, I'm almost out of tricks." The elevator slowed to a crawl, and the doors opened with a hiss, revealing a darkened chamber. Dax stepped out cautiously, gripping his weapon tight, his eyes scanning every corner for movement. The room was large and empty, a forgotten storage area from the early days of the colony. Old crates and rusted machinery sat in piles, casting long shadows in the dim light. Nothing moved. For a moment, The quiet was almost peaceful, but not for long. Dax could hear the thudding of boots above, the unmistakable sound of Zareth's heavy step. The Elkaron had to be getting close. It wouldn't be long before his enemies found him, and there wouldn't be enough time to escape this time. "Looks like we're down to the wire, huh?" Dax said aloud to no one in particular. "Okay, last act. Here goes." He took a deep breath, then fumbled around the crate next to him, pulling out a small rectangular device from one of his many pockets. It was old tech, something he'd scavenged from the Outer Rim on a previous job. A subversive sabotage chip. Simple, low-tech, but effective if used right. He'd been saving it for a rainy day, and now seemed like the perfect storm. It was the one thing that might just turn the tide, but even then, there were no guarantees. He plugged the device into the terminal on the far wall, watching as the interface flickered to life. A series of flashing lights and numbers scrolled down the screen, each one feeling like a countdown. He could hear Zareth's soldiers closing in, their voices growing louder. They were coming. "All right, you glorious piece of junk, let's make this work." Dax's fingers danced over the console, tapping in the command sequence. The chip was almost ready to initiate the EMP blast. The grid would fry, knocking out power across the colony's systems, and it would buy them precious minutes, maybe even hours. If Arky's override worked in time, they could finally escape this mess. But if not, well, he'd be right there, making sure Zareth didn't get the satisfaction of taking him out. A beep. Then another. The device was ready. "Here goes nothing," Dax muttered, pressing the final key. The EMP pulse rippled out from the console, sending a wave of energy that rattled the walls and sent a series of sparks dancing along the ceiling. He'd done it. Now all they needed was a way out. Dax's comm buzzed in his ear, cutting through the static and noise. "Dax?" Arky's voice came through, sounding strained but determined. "Did you—" "EMP pulse is live," he interrupted, still watching the terminal. "No power anywhere, but it's only temporary. I need—" The ground beneath his feet trembled, a deep rumble that sent a shiver down his spine. The colony's core was unstable, and the EMP had only made things worse. "Dax, get out of there! The core's about to breach." He froze. His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, breach?" "The core's been deteriorating for weeks," Arky explained, her voice crackling. "When you hit the EMP, it triggered a chain reaction. The cooling systems are offline. We've got minutes, maybe less." Dax swallowed. "Great. Just what I needed. You sure you can get to the override in time?" "I'm not going to let you die here," Arky replied, her tone fierce, more determined than ever. "You've done enough, Dax. Now we finish this together. You get to the escape pods. I'll take care of the rest." "Like hell I'm leaving you behind," Dax said, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "We're in this together. I didn't come this far just to bail on you now." Before Arky could respond, the ground trembled again, more violently this time, and the lights flickered and died. Dax cursed under his breath. "Okay, no more time for heartfelt speeches. Where's the nearest pod?" "Follow the central corridor," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But be careful. Zareth's already there. If you don't want him to get the satisfaction of vaporizing you, you need to move fast." The comm crackled and went silent, leaving Dax standing alone in the darkened chamber, the low hum of the failing core the only sound. His pulse quickened. He didn't have much time, but he wasn't about to give up now, not when they were so close to the finish line. He shoved the terminal's controls aside, making a beeline for the corridor. The air felt thick, charged with tension, and every step he took seemed to echo with the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days. Arky had been right. They had come a long way together. A mismatched pair, both exiles in their own right, trying to outrun their pasts. Dax had always been a lone wolf, never trusting anyone. But somehow, Arky had made him believe again, made him care when he thought he was beyond saving. And now, for better or worse, they were in this together. He wasn't going to leave her behind. Not this time. He reached the central corridor just as the first of Zareth's soldiers appeared, blocking his path. Dax's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon, aiming it squarely at the soldier. "I was hoping I could avoid this," Dax said, his voice surprisingly calm. "But I guess we're not that lucky." The soldier raised its plasma rifle, but Dax didn't give it a chance. He fired first, sending the soldier reeling back with a shot to the chest. The Elkaran's body crumpled to the floor, and Dax dashed forward, hoping to get to the pod before Zareth himself showed up. It was close. Too close. But by the time Zareth's hulking figure appeared, Dax was already inside the pod, slamming the door shut. The automated system kicked in, and the pod shot out of the colony, just as the core exploded behind him, sending shockwaves through the air. Dax's chest heaved, but he couldn't stop the grin that spread across his face. He'd done it. They'd done it. "I knew we'd make it," he whispered, his fingers flying across the control panel to set a course for the nearest station. Just as he leaned back, exhausted, Arky's voice came through his comm once again. "We made it," she said softly. "You're a pain in the ass, but thanks, Dax." "Anytime, Arky. I told you I'd stick around." He laughed, the sound light and relieved. For the first time in what felt like forever, Dax allowed himself to relax. They were free. The colony was behind them, and the galaxy was wide open. Together they would take on whatever came next. And somehow, Dax was sure that, whatever it was, they'd handle it. Together. The stars stretched out before them, and Dax let out a contented sigh. It had been one hell of a ride, but this was only the beginning.